The birth of Lord Ganesha is one of the most fascinating stories in Hindu mythology. A story of Parvati, Shiva, and a young boy who would one day become known as Ganesha. But the story also raises some interesting questions. Can a human being be created from a turmeric paste? And can the head of one living being be placed upon another? Perhaps these questions cannot be answered by looking only at the story as a physical event. But what if, instead, the story is inviting us to look deeper? Let's explore the birth of Ganesha from both traditional and spiritual perspectives. Long ago on Mount Kailash lived Goddess Parvati and Lord Shiva. One day, Goddess Parvati went to bathe in seclusion. She wanted to be undisturbed and instructed that no one should enter until she had finished. So, she decided to create a guardian of her own. Parvati took the turmeric paste and sacred substances from her own body and fashioned them into the form of a young boy. Then, through her divine power, she breathed life into him. The boy opened his eyes. He was beautiful, radiant, and powerful. Parvati looked at him with great affection and said, "You are my son." She then gave him an important task. Stand at the entrance and do not allow anyone to enter until I give you permission. The boy respectfully accepted his mother's command. He stood at the doorway, determined to protect her. Soon Lord Shiva returned to Mount Kailash. Shiva approached the entrance, but the young boy stopped him. "Who are you?" Shiva asked. The boy replied, "I am the son of Goddess Parvati. My mother has ordered me not to allow anyone to enter." Shiva explained that he was Parvati's husband and the Lord of Kailash. But the boy refused to move. "I have been given a command by my mother. I cannot disobey her." Shiva's attendants tried to convince the boy to step aside, but he would not. A fierce battle followed. The boy bravely fought against Shiva's attendants and defeated them. Eventually, Lord Shiva himself confronted the young guardian. The boy continued to protect the entrance, refusing to let Shiva pass. The conflict became fierce. In the end, Shiva, in his divine power, severed the boy's head. When Goddess Parvati came out and saw what had happened, she was filled with grief and anger. She revealed that the boy was her beloved son. Parvati's anger shook the entire universe. She demanded that her son be brought back to life. To calm her and restore balance, Lord Shiva agreed. He instructed his attendants, "Go northward and bring me the head of the first living being you encounter." They returned with the head of an elephant. Shiva placed the elephant's head upon the boy's body and restored him to life. The boy awakened once again, but this time he was no ordinary child. Lord Shiva accepted him as his own son and gave him a divine place among the gods. Shiva declared, "From this day onward, you shall be known as Ganesha, the Lord of the Ganas." He also granted Ganesha a special blessing. Before the worship of any god, you shall be worshipped first. Thus, Ganesha became Vignaharta, the remover of obstacles, and Siddhivinayak, the giver of success and accomplishment. From that moment onward, Lord Ganesha became one of the most beloved deities in Hindu tradition. Now that you have heard the traditional story of the birth of Lord Ganesha, let us look at the same story from a different perspective. When we look more deeply, several questions naturally arise. Did Shiva and Parvati literally live in the Himalayas? Why would a divine being choose such a harsh and isolated place? Can a human being really be created from turmeric paste or material from the body? Why would Shiva, the great Lord, become involved in such a seemingly simple conflict? How could such a powerful divine being suffer casualties in a battle? And can the head of another animal really be placed on a human body? If we insist on looking at every detail only through the lens of physical reality, many of these questions remain unanswered. But perhaps the story is inviting us to look at something beyond the physical event. So now, let us look at the story through the prism of Vedanta. The story begins with Parvati creating a child from material associated with herself and giving him life through her divine power. Parvati can be understood as Shakti, the divine power through which manifestation takes place. The universe itself appears as countless names and forms, and every individual appears as a separate being. But where does this individuality come from? In the language of Vedanta, one underlying reality appears as many through nama and rupa, name and form. So Ganesha's creation can be seen as the emergence of an individual form from the power of manifestation itself. He develops a sense of identity through his body, name, relationship, and duty. He takes his duty of protecting the entrance seriously. When Shiva arrives, Ganesha stops him. Shiva asks who he is. Ganesha identifies himself through his relationship and duty. I am Parvati's son, and I am protecting my mother. There is nothing wrong about this. We all identify ourselves through our body, name, relationships, profession, and experiences. But Advaita asks a deeper question. Who am I really? The body changes. The mind changes. Our thoughts, emotions, and roles change. Yet something remains aware of all these changes. Vedanta invites us to turn our attention toward that awareness. And this brings us back to the doorway where Ganesha stands. Ganesha refuses to move. Shiva's attendants try to overcome him. A conflict follows. Eventually, Shiva himself confronts Ganesha. Symbolically, the conflict represents something that happens within every seeker. And a doorway represents the boundary between the limited individual and the infinite reality. Shiva is that infinite reality. What keeps us on one side? Ahankara, the sense of I am this separate individual. It does not necessarily mean arrogance. Ahankara gives us our individual identity and helps us function in the world. But when we mistake that limited identity for our ultimate nature, we experience separation. Then comes the most dramatic moment. Shiva severs Ganesha's head and restores it with the head of an elephant. The child who once stood against Shiva now becomes one of the most revered forms of the divine. Here, elephant represents strength, intelligence, memory, patience, and wisdom. Symbolically, it represents the destruction of limited identity and awakening of wisdom and higher consciousness. There is another subtle point. The story appears to present Shiva and Parvati as two separate beings. But from an Advaitic perspective, Shiva and Shakti may appear as distinct in the world of names and forms, but Advaita ultimately points toward the underlying unity. Ultimate reality is not divided into two independent realities. Brahman is one. But the creator, the creation, and the consciousness that knows the creation are not ultimately separate realities. The many arise within the one.